details. Purnima, what are you learning in terms of the security situation on ground? We, of course, learned that there was a security committee formed as well, and now we are learning is that there is a curfew which will be imposed again today.
Well, the situation is very volatile since yesterday. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was appointed as the interim president, said that the curfew will be imposed till 5 a.m. today. They also said that there could be an emergency declared if things turn violent. And here at the Golfes, even though protests are going on peacefully for at least for the last 97 days, there have been security officials deployed in the parliament, in and around the parliament, because that's where a section of the protesters tried storming towards the parliament late last night, and dramatic scenes unfolded there as well. And considering that protests are intensifying, considering that there has been a delay in Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation, another curfew imposed starting from noon today till 5 a.m. tomorrow, because protesters are still waiting patiently, but just to ensure that no untoward incident takes place, curfew has been imposed by the interim President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Meanwhile, after the speaker urged protesters to vacate the government places, including the presidential palace.
We'll be moving over to those details in just a bit, but I'd like to ask you another question on the security situation, because there were reports of protesters marching to the parliamentary building as well at night. How did security forces manage to stop those protesters? Did they manage to get anywhere close to the parliamentary building?
They were not able to get anywhere closer to the parliament, because there was heavy police security deployment even before they tried entering the lane that leads to the parliament. Remember, tri-forces were deployed and tear gas were fired, multiple rounds of tear gas fired, and they were also trying to disperse the crowd. Water cannons, tear gas were used to disperse the crowd. Protesters refused to leave, but they did not go anywhere closer to the parliament. In fact, many of them decided to come back so that they did not want to storm the parliament. That's why you can see that last night dramatic scenes unfolded in and around the parliament. They were not able to go anywhere closer to the parliament, but dramatic scenes, tear gas being fired, water cannons used to disperse the crowd. Over 500 protesters had gathered, and reports say that at least 30 of them were injured when tear gas and water cannons were used to disperse the crowd. But those went on for about 2 hours in and around the parliament, but finally the situation came under control, and even now as we speak, there are heavy security deployment in and around the parliament just to ensure that no untoward incident takes place and that protesters don't gather and try to storm the parliament. Therefore, one of the reasons why the curfew is imposed is because they are now not sure how protesters may in fact react, which is why curfew now imposed from 12 to 5 a.m. and meanwhile heavy security deployment in and around the parliament as well.
Absolutely. Yesterday was an unprecedented day in the history of Sri Lanka. Having said that, I'm going to request Purnima to stay with us as we also take you through where things stand off as far as the political developments in Sri Lanka are concerned. The ground reality, of course, is that Gotabaya stays on as president till date. This is the latest that we'll be learning, that right now there has been no resignation coming in from Gotabaya. What Lankans see this development as Gotabaya refusing to give up absolute power. Clearly, because as the speaker had announced yesterday, a resignation was expected, which has not been tendered in so far. Now, the other ground reality is that Lankan speaker is yet to receive the resignation of Gotabaya. As I was just telling you, no resignation has been tendered in by Gotabaya Rajapaksa. In fact, there was a Gazette notification that he sent which announced Ranil Wickremesinghe as the acting president. The promise of resigning is just an eyewash. That's how Sri Lankans are seeing this. Remember, the protesters are refusing to give up till there's a formal resignation both by Ranil Wickremesinghe and Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Ranil now is named as the acting president in Rajapaksa's absence. That is the ground reality at the moment. What Lankans see is that he will be acting as Gotabai's lackey in his absence. That is how Sri Lankans have been viewing this entire situation. For more details, let's quickly go back to Purnima. Purnima, we just draw that, we were drawing that contrast between the ground reality and how the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government is now playing this whole this game of corruption, or rather Game of Thrones. We've also seen what was happening yesterday, some very dramatic visuals out there conveying the anger of the protesters. Could you give us a sense of how protesters are seeing these developments as far as the Rajapaksas are concerned, that there's no resignation so far and that Ranil Wickremesinghe remains the acting president? What are protesters telling you?
Well, protesters say that Rajapaksa leaving the country is something that was on expected lines, but the delay is only adding to the frustration, because they say that it's been more than 24 hours as promised, but in fact Rajapaksa still has not, Gotabaya Rajapaksa still has not submitted his resignation, and the speaker is trying to buy time by saying that the resignation is likely. If I can ask one of the protesters here, Rajapaksa still not submitting his resignation letter. Do you think it's some sort of an eyewash, or are you confident that he would eventually resign today? How do you see the developments? You've been waiting patiently.
Now Sri Lanka is very unstable. Now the situation is very horrible situation. I think he need to resign right now, because otherwise actually we might not have a stable country. So I think the people now in everywhere, now people are in our temple streets, and even Prime Minister office, and we are okay if they could go. We give everything to the government again.
But the delay in Gotabaya's resignation, how do you see that? Do you think they are trying to buy time? Do you think
if he resign, actually we are very happy.
But if he doesn't resign?
Actually, I cannot understand. Very, I think this condition will getting worse and worse. Yeah.
So many of them say that he should eventually resign, because that's the power of the people's movement, but they don't know when he would resign, but they are patiently waiting for him to resign, because only when he resigns can an interim government be formed, can someone else occupy the top post, and that alone could bring some sort of a political stability, is what protesters here are saying. Meanwhile, protesters who say who have been occupying these government places are okay to leave. That's the word coming in from the protester, that they will be vacating all the government places that they have occupied since Saturday night, whether it's the presidential secretariat, the palace, the temple trees, and also the Prime Minister's office. Eventually they will be vacating, and now that a curfew has been imposed across Sri Lanka from starting from noon till 5 a.m. they are trying to ensure that situation comes under control because of the kind of scenes that we've seen.